Hi, welcome back to our channel. Today we're covering chapter 6 of the book, The Ending of Time. And I quickly want to recap what we left off in the last chapter, and that is it was sort of hinted at that having insight leads to a different kind of mind, to a new kind of mind, and also that having insight might have an impact on the very physicality of the brain. And I want us to remember that in previous conversations, previous conversations revolved around the theme that man is sort of stuck in, the contents of his own mind, and those contents are often time-bound, or mostly time-bound. So man constantly sort of feeds back on the contents of his mind, on previous experiences, on memories, or on acquired knowledge even, and that keeps him in a sort of path-dependent state. And it was also alluded to that it's almost impossible to escape that bind to what they coined psychological time. And the question arose, whether the escaping out of that bind could be done at all, and if so, how. And thirdly, I think the question was discussed, how someone who sort of had already escaped out of the mind could inform other people that were still stuck in time. So that's kind of like where we are coming from. And this chapter picks up on all that, but it goes further. And we end up in a discussion on whether, the very physicality of the brain can be altered by entering a different state of mind. And this, of course, points back to a very fundamental question in philosophy, and that is the mind-body problem. And there's also fundamentally opposing positions to that problem. And I think at this point, before entering into this chapter, into this next 6th chapter, I think it would be worthwhile to sort of detach ourselves from the text shortly and visit these fundamental positions, just so that, with regards to the mind-body problem. Because I think it's important to know about these positions before we delve back into the text. So really we can distinguish four sort of mainstream positions, if you will, and those are the positions that sort of tend to prevail over time. And I'm going to show you pictures now, one picture for each position, and I will comment the picture. So here's picture number 1. The first position to the question, to the mind-body problem, is substance dualism. And substance dualism holds that every human being possesses a soul in addition to the body, and that the soul is an immaterial substance independent of the body, which constitutes the very self of the human being, and which can continue to exist without the body after its death. Now, from the point of view of I consciousness, a substance dualist would say, I am my soul and I have a body. Let's move to the second position, and that would be substance physicalism. Now, substance physicalists, on the other hand, hold that man, like all other living beings, is a thoroughly physical being, and that there is no immaterial soul independent of the body. So, again, from the point of view of I consciousness, a substance physicalist would say, I am just my body. Now, the third position is that the one of property dualism. For property dualists, mental properties are ontologically independent in the sense that they are neither themselves physical properties nor reducible to such properties. Now again, from the point of view of I consciousness, a property dualist would say, I am my body, which can have mental properties. And the fourth position one can hold is the one of property physicalism. So property physicalists hold that mental properties are, despite appearances, physical properties after all, or reducible to such properties. And from the point of view of I consciousness, a property physicalist would say, I am my body, which can produce mental qualities. Now, by now you should be sufficiently confused as to the possible positions there are. But I think, it's not about understanding all these different positions right away, but it's just to get you thinking, and maybe get you pondering on what it is that you think, and what it is that you experience. So, and I think it's an important exercise. And at the very end of the discussion of this whole book, I will hopefully offer you a fifth possibility or a fifth possible position, which in essence tries to distill, the view that Krishnamurti and Bohm offer in this book. So, but now let's properly dive into the discussion of that sixth chapter. And I would like to start with a series of hypotheses. This chapter is very dense, it holds a lot of content, a lot of different sort of investigations, and just for time's sake, I will have to condense it somehow. So I will start off with 6 hypotheses. The first one being the prevailing materialist paradigm impacts the mind, the nervous system, the body, and society as a whole. The second one, the human brain seems to have been set on a certain path or pattern for millennia, and radical change is called for in order to change humanity's trajectory. Thirdly, contemporary science will have a hard time bringing about this change because its foundations are themselves deeply rooted in the same pattern. Fourth, there is a function in the brain that can act without reference to its content. Fifth, it is not a result of progressive knowledge or progressive time. It is not a remembrance. It is not come by through any exercise of free will. And sixth, there are different levels of matter, which is why thought could be considered part of the material process of the brain. And right around there, we enter into the mind-body problem, proper. And I would like to now review a short excerpt of the actual conversation. Well, thought is part of the content, part of the material process. Whether it exists independently as matter is not so clear. You can say whatever is matter. You can pour water from one glass to another. It has an independent substance. But it is not clear whether thought could stand as matter by itself, except with some other material substance like the brain in which it takes place. Is that clear? I don't quite follow. If you say water is matter, then it is clear. Now, if you say thought is matter, then thought must have a similar independent substance. You say air is matter, right? Or water is matter. Now, waves are not matter. They are just a process in matter. It is clear. Is it clear what I mean? Yes, a wave is a process in matter. A material process. Is thought matter, or is it a process in matter? That's a important distinction, and I'm tempted to interject, with a personal account, but then I'm not sure if it makes sense, so I probably shouldn't. Anyway, sorry. So I think this possible distinction is important to make, if thought, because the dualists are very, quick in giving thought substantive, quality, or quick to say it's either a substance as much as matter is a substance, or it is, an epiphenomenon, and in it being an epiphenomenon, it sort of has substantial quality, at least in our mind. I don't know if I can make myself clear here, but so I think this distinction, between thought potentially being just a material process is rather than being matter, is an important one. And after a short discussion, they agree on the following hypothesis. Thought is a material process in the brain. Now, that's settled. We still have to figure out how the brain and how thinking could be changed fundamentally, in order to alter the trajectory of humankind. And an obvious question is posed by Krishnamurti. Can the material process in the brain bring about a change in itself? Now, essentially the question here is whether you can think your way out of the conundrum of, being human and being stuck in time and being identified with the contents of mind. And Krishnamurti continues, thought is a material process in the brain, and any other movements springing from that material process is still material. So Bohm says, yes, it has to be. Has to be, right. And is there another activity which is not a material process? Well, of course, people have asked that question for ages. Is the spirit beyond matter, right? Spirit, Holy Ghost. Is there a material process in the brain? Is there some other activity which it cannot be related to the material process? Well, it cannot depend on it. Insight cannot depend on the material process, as it would be just another material process then. It cannot depend on it. insight is not dependent on the material process, which is thought. But you were saying it the other way around, that the material process may depend on insight, may be changed by insight. The material process is dependent on it, and not that dependent on this. Now you see, many people would not see how something non-material could affect something material. So I think this was an important excerpt, and we can summarize the so far discussed in the following two hypotheses. Insight is not dependent on the material process, but it can act on it. And secondly, when the material process is in action, insight cannot exist. Now, the problem of causation between mind and matter is discussed further, and we're going to go in a rather lengthy bit of excerpt next, but I think it's important to follow it in order to sort of drive their points home. And at any rate, I would suggest you either listen to the actual conversation. I'm always linking the recording of that bit of conversation in the description box, or read through the chapter of the transcript, just to get the whole dialogue. Something has just come to mind. Love has no cause. Hate has a cause. Insight has no cause. The material process as thought has a cause, right? Yes, it is part of the chain of cause and effect. Can that which has no cause ever act upon that which has a cause? It might. We can see no reason why that which has no cause might not act on something that has a cause. There is no obvious reason. It wouldn't happen the other way around. What has a cause cannot act on that which has no cause, because that would invalidate it. That's right. But apparently the action of insight has an extraordinary effect on the material process. Are we saying that insight is an energy which illuminates the activity of the brain, and that in this illumination, the brain itself begins to act differently? You're quite right. That's all. That is what takes place, yes. We say the source of this illumination is not in the material process. It has no cause. No cause. But it is a real energy. It is pure energy. Is there action without cause? Yes, without time. Cause implies time. Could you say that the material process generally operates in a kind of darkness, and therefore it has set itself on a wrong path? In darkness, yes, that is clear. The material process acts in ignorance, in darkness. And this flash of insight enlightens the whole field, which means that ignorance and darkness have been dispelled. I will hold to that. You could say then that darkness and light cannot coexist for obvious reasons. Nevertheless, the very existence of light is to change the process of darkness. Quite right. But what contributes the flash? We haven't come to that yet. I want to go step by step into this. What has happened is that the material process has worked in darkness and has brought about confusion and all the mess that exists in the world. But this flash of insight wipes away all the darkness, which means that the material process is not then working in darkness. Right. But now let's make another point clear. When the flash has gone, the light continues. The material process is working in darkness, in time, in knowledge, in ignorance, and so on. When insight takes place, there is the dispelling of that darkness. That is all we are saying. Insight dispels that darkness, and thought, which is the material process, no longer works in darkness. Therefore, that light has it has ended ignorance. So we say that this darkness is really something which is built into the content of thought. The content is darkness. That's right. Then that light has dispelled that ignorance. That's right, dispelled the content. But still, we have to be very careful in case we still have content in the usually accepted sense of the word, all kind of things. Of course. So we can't say that the light has dispelled all the content. It has dispelled the center of darkness. Yes, the source, the creator of darkness. The self, right? It has dispelled the center of darkness, which is the self. We could say that the self, which is part of the content, that part of the content which is the center of darkness, which creates it and maintains it, is dispelled. The question you put was about a mutation in the brain cells. That question has been put after a series of discussions. And we have come to a point when we say that the flash, that light, has no cause. That the light operates on that which has cause, which is the darkness. That darkness exists as long as the self is there. It is the originator of that darkness, but light dispels the very center of darkness. That's all. We have come to that point. And therefore, there is a mutation. Then I say that the question of how I get this flash of insight, how does it happen, is a wrong question. There is no how. And now a person in the audience, because there was a small audience at the time of the recording, asked a question. There is no how, but there is darkness and there is light. Just see first, there is no how. If you show me how, you're back into the darkness, right? Yes. So, to summarize, thought is a process, is part of the material process of the brain. Okay, I mean, I'm summarizing what their position is. So thought is part of the material process of the brain. The content of thought relies almost exclusively on, acquired knowledge, on experiences one has had, and hence memories. And it tends to be time-bound in that it is either looking back in time or anticipating a future. And it always does from a point of view of a subject, of a self or I that has had those experiences, that now is retrieving those memories, and that can anticipate a future for itself. So, and that being so, and in earlier chapters they said that they came to the conclusion that, that the that I-ness is an illusion, or at least that's what I'm reading into it. I have to be careful here. Now, I have to be careful because I have to confess, I actually just finished writing a book on these very subjects, and I included, the writing of David Bohm and Krishnamurti. So, and I developed based on all the knowledge that based on all the stuff that I read, I developed a sort of a fifth possible position. So I have to be really careful not to mix my own thought, my own thinking, and to sort of mix it with what they actually said. But at least what I said prior to that is true, is that they then said, well, if that is so, if man is usually trapped in sort of like the time-bound contents of his mind, the question arose whether there's a way out of it and what that way could be. And I think we then started talking about, there seems to be something that they coined insight, which is out of time, which happens instantly, but which seems to be disconnected from thought or the contents of mind. And they were really careful in not calling that God, and in not giving that, which they actually oftentimes call that, because they don't want to give it a name. They call it that or insight. So they were really careful about not calling it God, because they certainly don't mean to call it God in the sense that we usually think of God, of a person or personified sort of force that is somehow steering affairs, So in this chapter sorry, I'm really distracted by the voices in the hallway, even though I'm wearing headphones. So in this chapter, we explored a possible relationship that insight could have with, a brain that is seemingly physical, seemingly just physical. They discussed that there might be a part in the brain that is untouched by the content, that is, and I don't think they're not clear on calling it a part or an activity or a potential, they just say there seems to be something that is able to sort of resound with insight, once insight acts upon a brain. And what I think is also clear is that this is something that sort of happens momentarily, which is why there's talk about a flash, it's almost like it happens instantly. So I think if we talk about enlightenment, we would sort of think of a similar thing. You know, we would think that enlightenment happens instantly, you know, and it's irreversible. You know, it's like once a brain has been enlightened, there is no turning back. And it seems that it has a lot to do with destruction of that sense of self, which keeps the brain time bound, in that it gives the content of the brain, you know, or it gives thought, you know, just major importance, you know, at all times. And it also tends to uphold that sense of self, because every time you have a thought, and now this I have to clarify, this is me speaking now, so I'm no longer referring to the actual text, but if you think about it, every time you have a thought, a byproduct of your having a thought is thinking that is actually strengthening your sense of I-ness or me-ness. So it's like this self-referential process that happens when you're thinking, and it's almost like you can't avoid it. The only thing you could do is not pay that much attention to the I, you know, that's being created as sort of like a byproduct of thought. So yeah, so I think that so this chapter concludes with the notion that there's a possibility and to have insight, and you know that the possibility is pretty much given to all of mankind. And that once insight has taken place, there is no going back to living in a ego sort of consciousness, or a consciousness that is centered around an ego or an I or a self. Now, in the meantime, it has become dark outside. And I hope you could profit from some of these thoughts. If you have, please like, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.